I get the Pakistani green one.
Yeah, they're very carefully color-coded, I think.
All for pink.
The confident metrosexuals get the pink. Welcome to this panel, which I know many of you are excited about and keen to listen to this extraordinary mix of expertise, perspectives, and even nationalities on cricket on this panel. It is, of course, unmissable that JLF and its organizers, with their usual acuity, have scheduled this on the eve of the most important cricket match there is in this World Cup, as Michael... And we are getting live updates on how well Sri Lanka do. The weather's held in London. Whether it's going to hold in Manchester is a million-dollar question. If it's sunny, there will be no South Asians at JLF tomorrow. We know that for sure. I certainly plan to skip all three that I'm meant to be speaking on. But it is an important encounter. Michael Clarke, of course, tweeted today saying not just India and Pakistan are going to come to a standstill. Australia is also going to come to a standstill, he tells us. Not about today's match with Sri Lanka, but the Indo-Pak match tomorrow. So it is an important encounter, and we are going to talk about it, but I don't want this panel completely overwhelmed by that discussion. There are other things to talk about while talking about that encounter, and I know that my panelists will do justice to that range of issues. The second thing to note, just as we start, is that there is a lot of writing around cricket, and there are different kinds of writing, but there is something that marks a South Asian engagement with writing about cricket, which is quite distinct from a more bucolic English take on the game, especially in fiction and non-fiction writing on it. And we want to bring out this particular South Asian texture of it in a variety of different ways. We have a novelist, we have a historian, we have a journalist, and I don't know how to classify Shashi. So, and we have Shashi's take on it. Each of the panelists, and I think a lot of the South Asian writers, whatever their backgrounds, tell the story in very particular ways with very particular perspectives, and I'm going to ask them to talk about that. So how the story of cricket is told, I think, is one that we want to talk about. So we're going to start with, I'm going to start by asking Prashant a question, and then I will move to Romesh, and then Wajahat, and Shashi Tharoor. I should say at the outset that Wajahat, as you know from your programs, has co-written the book, Game Changers with Shahid Afridi. Shahid Afridi was meant to be on this panel. He's not here because of Her Majesty's government, who failed to give him a visa in time. If you would like to tweet that, do. I encourage you to do so. Now, Prashant, your book, which, excellent, it's up. Cricket Country, which has just been released in India and will be released in the UK next month. An Indian Odyssey in the Age of Empire tells the story of the first Indian cricket team to tour England. It is an all-India team, and it's a fascinating story. This happens in 1911, and Prashant, as a trained historian, reads the archive in a very particular and fantastically interesting way. So there are issues of nationalism. There is an issue of nation building as well, and that improbable mixture of caste and class that is reflected in this first all-India team that comes to England, all happening in the backdrop of the coronation Darbar and 1911 and the move to New Delhi as the capital. There's lots happening in India and lots happening in England. So these issues of nation, politics, the idea of India, of social demographics of the cricket team, are issues that are absolutely germane to your account. As a historian reflecting on the 100 years since that event, would you say that those issues have continued to remain equally salient, or was this very much a product of that time?
Thanks very much for that question, Mukulika, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you all today, and with this very distinguished panel. I think the answer is yes, in the sense that all the particular issues that you mentioned, nationalism, the idea of India, empire, sport, politics, the social context, the social dimensions, all of those are still equally relevant for the sport as it is today. I think what's very interesting is how cricket has become this vehicle for so many different kinds of processes and projects, and that's what the book really tries to recover. When I started researching this book, I thought, the idea of the first Indian cricket team, and we tend to think of sport very much in terms of nationalism versus colonialism. And I thought this might be a project which manifested a certain kind of nationalist consciousness on the sporting field. And of course, that's the dominant image we also have from films like Lagan, which pit the colonizer versus the colonized. But as it happens, in this particular case, the idea of India on the cricket pitch was fashioned not against the empire, but by the forces of empire. And it's a very complicated story of how a transnational sort of alliance between Indian princes, businessmen, and British interests, civil servants, governors, journalists, coaches, come together to create this idea of India on the cricket pitch and to create this first Indian cricket team, which comes out to Britain in the summer of 1911. And what was really remarkable about this, of course, was that this tour, the cricket team, and the tour that it undertakes to the heart of empire, was about affirming India's place within the empire. And I think that was the most interesting thing for me today, because today when we think of the hyper-nationalism around cricket, the cricket team, the Indian cricket team, or cricket teams across South Asia for that matter, are seen as organic expressions of the nation. They are seen to symbolize the nation. And here was a context where the nation was actually forged to affirm its status, India's status as part of the British Empire. And I think that was, for me, a really fascinating aspect of this project. And also the fact that it took 12 years to put together the first all-India cricket team, 3 failed projects. So the book is really about the making of that cricket team, its history, and how that team comes together. And the players and the characters are equally fascinating. The team is led by a prince who's battling to save his throne. The team is chosen on the basis of religious identity. They're Parsis, they're Hindus and Muslims, and communal representation is the basis for selection. And remarkably, 2 of the star players for in this cricket team are Dalits. 2 Dalits haven't played simultaneously for India since. So it was quite extraordinary that that you had this team with this extraordinary range of characters, and then they come to Britain in the summer of 1911, and it's one of the hottest summers since the 17th century. Britain is going up in flames. There's crisis in the House of Lords and Parliament, much like it is today, and this cricket team is going around. They go to Wales, and they go to England, and they go to Scotland, and they go to Ireland. And it's an amazing story of how cricket becomes a way of forging both the imagined communities, as I say, of nation and empire. So all the themes that you talked about, I think, are there, and they continue in many ways. I mean, we have not got rid of nationalism on the sporting field. In fact, I think we will spend much of our time today talking about that very aspect.
Can you just briefly tell us, very briefly, why did it take 12 years?
Well, essentially, the first Indians to come out were not, were the Parsis. They came out in the 1880s. But then Parsi cricket became very weak. And the Parsis, who were, of course, very Anglophile, many of them, could not put together a team of their own. They realized as their cricket began to weaken that they needed to put together a team that would be stronger, as it were, in taking on British teams. The first time the project of putting together an Indian team comes together is around the figure of Ranji, who, of course, emerges in the 1890s. He's a global superstar. He's a real, he's an imperial celebrity. And when Ranji returns to India in 1898 to start sort of his bid for his throne, which he feels he's been unlawfully denied, cricket promoters in India try to use his superstar status to fashion a team around him. But Ranji doesn't want to play for India because he's trying to present himself as an English cricket icon. And he always has this very he keeps a distance from this project, so it fails. Then in 1902, there's an English cricket team called the Oxford Authentics, a bunch of eccentrics who go around playing all over the country. They're a very good cricket team. And after their departure, because some of the local teams have done very well against them, Indian cricket promoters in India start getting excited that you could send a team out again to Britain. And of course, by this time, European cricket had become very weak. So lots of European interests lined up behind this because they thought if they sent a team out to Britain, then teams from Britain would come out and visit them. But that exercise failed because of divisions between the Parsis and the Muslims and the Hindus over the composition of the team. They try again in 1906 because around Ranji, but Ranji has now become the Jam Sahib of Nawanagar, so he's not interested. And finally, in 1909, when you have the assassination of Curzon Wiley in Britain, there's a double assassination at the Imperial Institute here in July 1909. And there are long, sort of loud calls in Britain to stop Indians coming into Britain. They say basically it shows that the civilizing mission isn't working. Why should we allow all these dangerous people to come? They're forming terrorist cells. This was the age of a sort of revolutionary violence and so on. So Indian cricket promoters in India, led by the Tatars and the princes, decide that it would be a good idea to revive the project of sending an Indian cricket team out to Britain to reassure the British that India, if Indians can play cricket, they can't be such a bad lot. and to quell this growing unease about the movement of Indians into Britain, and to assure the British that India will be a loyal part of the British Empire if you recognize the Indian aspiration to Britishness, if you treat them as an equal part of the empire. So that's how the story unfolds.
Gosh, really prescient stuff for now, and something to take away for the fans who are planning to act out their animosities in the field tomorrow to convince post-Brexit Britain of their suitability. Romesh, let's turn to you, and as you quite correctly reminded us, the second most important match of the World Cup is being played as we speak. Now, this is your only novel based on cricket, and it's the last scene is a climax of a one-day international at the Oval, right? And
very much like today.
Very much like today. So, what made you write about it?
Okay, my first confession is I'm totally amazed that I wrote this book, so many years ago. This was like, I can't remember, 15 years ago or so. Why on earth did I write a book about cricket? I'm not a cricketer. My cricket experience is not a team experience. It's me and a cricket ball in a sock on a piece of string hanging from a branch of a tree. When I was growing up, I think I had small delusions of being a cricketer. And just to give you a sense of how far back this was a time when the great icons of cricket were in the West Indies, the three Ws. And I remember stories of people like Bradman coming to Ceylon. He came twice, apparently, one I can't remember the dates, which is why I'm not a huge cricket person, because statistics are hopeless with me. But he came in the 30s and again in the 40s. First time he was bowled out, I think, or he hit wicket, I think, within a few balls. The second time he was out as well, and it was a terrible tragedy because 20,000 people had come to see him bat. And he was out. There was no cheering that he was bowled out. Everyone was just stunned, and they wanted him to play some more. But I also, I think when I was very young, thought I belonged to a great Sri Lankan cricketing family, because some very prominent cricketers of the past were Gunesekaras, until my father pointed out that, no, they weren't the same Gunesekaras. Whereupon I think I bowled him a ball that hit him on the head and he fell down, and I didn't play cricket after that. But I remember I did an event at one point where I was asked to write a story on cricket. It was a big challenge for me. I managed to write a story. It went down well. But one of the other people at that was actually one of the actors from Lagan. You mentioned Lagan. Yes. And we got chatting, and he said, "You're a novelist. Why don't you write a novel about cricket?" And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, you know, a lot of us go to test matches, and there's nothing to do, really. And you're sort of hanging about, and you know they're just playing out there, and you read the Guardian or the Telegraph or whatever it is your political persuasion is, and you read it over and over again. Wouldn't it be much nicer to have a book to read?" I thought this is a great idea, and one of the things I hadn't done in the books that I had written up to then was to write anything about a really, in a sense, an uplifting story, which was what Sri Lankan cricket was in the lead up to, or immediately after '96 when they won the World Cup. And I thought, actually, yeah, I'll try and do this. I'll write a book about this, or to somehow bring it in. And I realized nobody actually, never mind about South Asian cricket writing, in fiction, there was very, very little written where cricket was seriously at the center of a book. There was a bit of village cricket. There was a bit of sort of, I don't know, P.G. Woodhouse type cricket. There's a little bit of cricket in chapters. I think Vikram Seth's book has something. Your book has something in it. But I thought something where cricket was, in a sense, the overriding metaphor just wasn't there. And I thought I better do it before someone else does. And of course, since then, there have been lots of books about it. So that's how I got into it. But I thought, can I just read a little bit from it? Because I thought it would be quite appropriate. Because, as you say, this book ends with a scene, with a match at the Oval, very much like today. But Sri Lanka was playing against India. And it was a significant match in many ways. The most significant part of it, for me, was the fact that I was there. In it, something happens which is very central to the book, which will give you some sense of what my cricket writing is about. Because my main protagonist is a man called Sonny Fernando. And he's not a cricketer, but he becomes really interested in cricket. And the whole idea of why do we support teams? Why do we support possibly national teams? And I think the Sri Lankan team is slightly different because it's got huge support outside Sri Lanka by other people. It's sort of everyone's favorite second team sort of thing. And, you know, that's interesting. And it was also interesting for me at that period when they weren't necessarily doing that well at this time, which is sort of 2004, 5, that sort of period. And why do we support teams when they're not doing well? Sometimes, actually, the disappointment is what we want, for some curious reason. Anyway, this is taken from a scene which some of you might remember, because it is very close to reality. It is something that happens at the Oval. I don't think it's happening right now, but then that's what fiction is. It stops time, so it could be happening right now. It happened right now, some time ago. So, here you go. I'll just stand up and do this. 2 Indian wickets had fallen. There was some faint hope among the Sri Lankans. Then Tendulkar stepped forward and smashed a long, hard drive. The ball, a round white bullet, shot across the grass towards a few fat pigeons congregated on an empty patch of ground. The birds were pecking at the earth and waddling about, ignoring the mad, momentous game around them, unaware of the tribal needs, the chameleon identities, the laws of science, and the art of hitting ducks. The ball sped into their midst and caused a flurry. The bird in the middle didn't stand a chance. The ball hit it. The pigeon keeled over. Play stopped. The whole of the oval was hushed. The nearest fielder walked over, actually Mahela Jawardner, walked over and picked the bird up as though it were the dove of peace. He carried it slowly towards the boundary. Sunny knew then this was the photograph for him. He ran down the rope faster than a long leg might streak to stop a boundary ball. He kept the lens aperture small, knowing that in his photograph, the sky would be a bowl where newspaper confetti floated like circling buzzards, while in the center, a pair of clasped hands prayed to a dying bird. Its feathers trembled just enough to blur, in and out of perfect focus like life itself. He clicked the shutter before the groundsman's bucket swung into view to collect the corpse. He didn't even need a light meter. There was something significant happening here. He knew, no matter what the outcome of the game would be, perhaps it was the power to silence that comes with death, however small the life, and our need to overcome it, to find some brief moment of care, hope, the tender possibility of renewal. This man, this game, this bird was salvation. The timing was perfect. Anything seemed possible. Peace, love, joy, life everlasting. It was all in the frame.
Wow. Okay, after peace, there is war. So, Wajahat and Shahid Afridi's book has a brilliant chapter title which says, "Batting India is Battling India." And this theme of war and cricket is constant as a backdrop in your case. And I think, Shashi, when we talk about your book, it's much more examined as a trope, but also in very real terms in this rivalry between India and Pakistan. And we obviously must talk about it. Now, Shahid Afridi is himself, in many senses, a game changer within the Pakistani cricket establishment as a working class, non-Oxbridge boy, a Pathan. And for those of you who've watched Shahid Afridi on the field, I think, Wajahat, it's a brilliant, his personality comes through in that book on every page, which is, it reads like a book that is like Shahid Afridi on the field, which is a terrific achievement, really. And you talk about his Afridi background, this is tribal warfare. And what is interesting is that it's not just the international warfare of playing games of cricket against other countries, but the warfare within the Pakistani cricket team itself, the Pakistani cricket board, and of course the big rivalry with India. So in that setting, you have an instance in 1996, I think, where 50,000 Indian supporters stand up and give a standing ovation to the Pakistani team. 1999. We have nerds on the panel. I'm informed, but I'm not a nerd. Wait till you read. I don't know if you've read Shashi's book, but every match has been discussed in some detail in each of them. So it meant something when an Indian crowd does that to Pakistan. Do you see that happening tomorrow, were Pakistan to win the match? Can you see, I mean, Pakistan may win the match, right? There's a 50-50 chance of Pakistan winning the match. And
I think rain may win the match.
Well, I mean, yes, of course. So where do you think this story is? Has it irrevocably changed with the jingoism of the current rivalry between the two countries?
No, it's evolved. That, if you pick up all of Chennai, which is where that standing ovation was, and then move it to Manchester, an unlikely venue for Indian Southerners, then perhaps we'll get a standing ovation. But I was just checking on Harsha Bhogle's feed this afternoon, and he recalled that moment. And he said, "Why can't this happen?" He tweeted, and Somebody just very dryly said, well, because it's not Chennai. So even within that framework of Indian fandom, which is unrivaled in modern cricket these days, clearly. I mean, there's all of India and then there's everybody else. I mean, it's literally like that commercially. I mean, whether it comes to the passion or the practice of cricket, it's pretty obvious where the great Indian cricket machine is headed and where this game is headed along with it. But that's sort of said to me, and us Pakistanis have always prayed that there should be at the same time, there should be a Indian Prime Minister from the South, an Indian President from the South, and an Indian Army Chief from the South, and then there will be peace in India and Pakistan.
This has nothing to do with the panelists present on the stage.
So secretly that they're trying to rig the next election and whatever they're trying to do up there. But clearly, I don't see that happening tomorrow. You're very kind when you say that it's a 50-50 chance. I think with half the Indian team kidnapped tonight or hungover tomorrow, perhaps then we're secretly praying for that. But no, he's not coming to Shahid and coming to batting India is battling India, or even better, the other chapter, Pathan versus Hindustan, which is like a Amitabh 80s flick. I think it's called, what was that? Khuda Gawah. Definitely shades of Khuda Gawah and Sri Devi there. But another southern Indian reference. But clearly, not an Oxbridge kind of hero, not from the Khan school, not an HSonian old boy. But he's seen this really critical time, which is when Pakistan started losing in the greater scheme and India started winning in so many ways. I mean, from the intimidating Khan to his proteges, Wasim and Waqar, the two Ws, to that great golden era of the fastest bowler, Shoaib Akhtar, etc., etc. We've all been there in the late 90s and the mid 2000s. But then Pakistan started losing, not just in cricket, but in terms of every indicator, socially, economically, name it. And there was a sense of disbelief when the ratio, the ODI ratio, which was that last yardstick of comparison. Of course, India was always larger, bigger, stronger, 71, Indira Gandhi, atomic weapons, blah, 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 all of that, first and everything, fine, right? But we have Imran Khan, and still do. And we have a different Imran Khan. More on that soon. But then, I mean, you get these guys, and yeah, they're not as well polished as the Khans and all the other chaps. But Afridi emerges as this last action hero. From the mountains of the Northwest, comes riding in a teenager, and he uses Sachin's bat, ironically enough, in that famous debut, and we talk about this in the book. And he uses Sachin's bat, and he blows the game apart, and he changes the game forever. And yes, a couple of Sri Lankan openers from that time, Sanath and the other one, Kalu, Vidarina, are also credited with really changing the pace of the opening game, so to say. But Afridi just took it to the next level, and there was no looking back. And then, of course, he's got this child star problem, right? I mean, he parties, and he's flawed, and he doesn't listen to instructions, and there's fights, and then they all find God together, and they all have beards now, and they're all praying on the field, and it's fantastic for one part of your brain, but the other part of your brain can't really believe that this is the great Pakistani team which played under Khan and, won in the MCG, for God's sake. in comes this guy, and as the country deteriorates at so many levels, so does the game. The politics step into the vacuum. He talks about that, the open religiosity, the sajdas increase, the beards get longer, match fixing comes in a huge way. They lose to the Bengalis right here in this country, while they make it to the final, but they lose to Bangladesh. They lose the final too, but that's a whole, in the shortest final ever played, which should have been featured, which should feature in your next book, by the way. But he sees this this rise and this fall, and most all-rounders get 8 to 12 years. This guy reinvents himself midlife in around 2006-07 because he finally finds a father figure, and obviously an old pudgy white man who has a very short yet intimate relationship with him, and then he dies. This is just like Jinnah dies on Pakistan, just like Bhutto dies on Pakistan, Bob Woolmer dies on him, right? So it is, for me, I mean, I'm not going to tell you to read between the lines, but it is the story of this new scarred Pakistan trying to play this game where now, I mean, you know, versus someone like his modern day rivals are people like Kohli and Gambhir and Irfan Pathan, who he, by the way, jokes that there can only be one Pathan in the field at any given time. Right? He doesn't like this other chap because his name is Pathan. He's like, how can you be a Pathan? I'm the Pathan, right? So, and he says that, and he's honest enough about it. So there's this gritty side to him. He speaks like a machine gun. He bats like one too. And I had to get his voice down, because between the Pashto and the Urdu and the Gali Galoj, which was unpublishable, I had to get that rat-a-tat thing in. And then, of course, covering the other side, his political ambition, which almost every South Asian cricketer seems to have these days, his tip of the hat to Imran, to Musharraf, to other famous generals we've had, as well as politicians. That was interesting to see as well. And how, of course, the best part, which both of us have gotten into trouble for, because he's so interesting and honest about it, he's just so honest about it, is women, and how he says that I will raise my girls like anyone else, but I will not let them play cricket. And at 18, they can do what they want, but I will not let them play cricket before that. And whoever needs to burn their bras may. And he says that to a post-Me Too, a hashtag, I hate you, Shahid, Pakistan. Shahid Afridi is a hypocrite. These sort of ideas come in from social media locally, who he takes bang on. He, in fact, encourage all of you to go watch his interview with Barkha Dutt, who was kind enough to cover us and review us for her famous show. And he was very earnest about tackling that question. It's a difficult place, Pakistan, and coming out of it, surviving it as a teenager, and then, of course, writing a book. Not many Pakistani cricketers write. That's why he needed my support. But not many of them are honest after they write. That's why Imran has half a dozen books to his name. He's still trying to write about himself. But anywho, the overall idea, game changer, was that as an imperfect state with a large mortal threat, there's a lot of there's a lot of focus on India. Clearly, that was a part of our thing. But I mean, it's not just about India. It's also about the other big three, the other rivalries. He's played for Hampshire here. So his story evolves from the mountains of Khyber to the mean streets of Karachi to the grounds of Hampshire. So it's an overall overarching attempt at self-immolation, I think. That's what it is, really.
You want to say something quickly?
I just wanted to come in when reading this, this whole thing of Afridi as the Pathan, because in the 1904 if the 1904 venture had succeeded, one of the players would have been the first Afridi player to have made his mark, which was a guy called Ahsanul Haq, who came out and he played for Hampstead CC. He was a lawyer, and he was a certainty. He was one of the great batsmen of the early 20th century. So if there was a combined team, that Afridi would have been playing. I mean,
wow,
as part of a
what
all
position?
India team.
What position?
He was a batsman.
Of course,
I think number 4.
As somebody who's lived and worked amongst Pashtuns, I have to say that a lot of Shahid Afridi's cricketing prowess really takes off on the streets of Karachi. We should say that as well. So the Pathan coming out of the Khyber Pass, the Afridi straight into, is a great image. Go with it. It'll sell the book, but just a footnote.
No, but that's the thing. I mean, by the way, Karachi is the largest Pashtun population in the world.
Yeah.
There's over 7 million Pashtuns there, and he talks about that bit as well, clearly. And about the main streets and how street cricket has, in a way, evolved as well as wrecked the modern game for Pakistan.
And I want to come back and talk about the technicalities of the tape ball, if I may, but later. Let's hear from Shashi first. Of course, what you have in common with Wajahat and Shahid Afridi's book is the dream unpartitioned Indo-Pak 11, which a game you played when ill in bed with, which was a very charming image. Of what your dream team of Indians and Pakistanis would be like. And you feel free to share it with the audience. I'm sure they're enthusiasts here. But I did want to ask you about, following on from what we've heard about Pakistan. You wrote this book a few years ago. You're very clear in making a distinction between how India conducts itself when Pakistan visits. This is a very different India you're describing in this book. A few years ago, there is a sharafat, there is a Nehruvian embrace of difference. It is not jingoistic. And you critique not just the Pakistanis, but also writers like Omar Noman for depicting Pakistani cricket in chauvinistic ways, in a way that you don't think Indian writers do. And I just wanted you to reflect on this portrayal now and whether you'd want to update that portrayal.
Well, you know, at our earlier session, I was talking about how India has changed so much in the 10 years that I've been back in Indian life and politics. And probably that's one of the things that's also changed. I mean, there's just as much, if not more, jingoism on display. I don't know if the Chennai applause is replicable in today's India, not least because there is now the sort of totalizing majoritarian fervor, which reduces a lot of what we would normally consider, for example, just recognition of fair play or decency to poor, whatever, to something that borders on the anti-national. So everything is that, you know, if you are an Indian, you are required to be, as it were, a chauvinistic-minded supporter of the team, is very different from the India I'm describing in that book, in which, of course, very openly, young people, boys and girls, would have posters of Pakistani cricketers in their bedrooms. And no one thought they were somehow being treasonous in admiring these good-looking players.
Anyone other than Imran? Or just...
Mainly Imran, I suspect, you're right. But a few others too. I mean, you know, the great paceman and the great batsman of Pakistan from the 70s onwards had genuine fan followings amongst Indian cricket lovers. And the thing is that I wonder if today, in the kind of atmosphere prevailing, if people actually felt that way, they'd be willing to flaunt it.
Did you want to say any more?
Well, I was so enjoying listening to the conversation. Okay, I wasn't sure you wanted to drag me into talking about. The fact is that there's so much here in all of these things. I mean, one of the issues about tomorrow's match, for example, is again the anxiety about whether it could end up bringing out the worst in all of us. There was a time when cricket seemed to rise above political differences. I've often mentioned how in 1999, on a day in which Indian and Pakistani soldiers were shooting at each other in Kargil, India and Pakistan played a World Cup match, India under a Muslim captain. And despite the incredible tension there must have been, that was a day in which 3 Indian officers and 6 Pakistani soldiers were killed. The match took place without incident and with a fairly decent level of camaraderie in the stands. I wonder if that's possible anymore. And I also, Wajahat is itching to chip in. Just wanted to end by saying that in today's atmosphere, there's a certain mean-spiritedness that has crept into the game. I explained in responding to a question in the afternoon that there is a certain exhaustion in India with the repeated incidents of terrorism coming from across the border. But the result with that is that there's no longer any, shall we say, acceptance anymore of Pakistani cricketers as just other cricketers. They're seen as Pakistanis first, so they don't get invited to play in the IPL, for example. Whereas in my book, I talk about the extraordinary sight of Shoaib Akhtar steaming in the Eden Gardens, with the crowd baying for him rather than Tendulkar, whom he was bowling to, who was, of course, representing Mumbai. Those days, I think, have somehow fallen victim to a totally different atmosphere within India and between the two countries. That would have been the point that...
Is that an irreversible change, you think?
I don't think so. I'd like to think not. But right now, it's not something that can be reversed instantly or quickly. And the concerns are genuine that when you're looking at, as some people are increasingly tending to do, at cricket as a substitute for other kinds of direct competition. I'm impatient in the book with the Western critic who described India-Pakistan matches as communal riot minus the machine guns or some silly thing, which I thought was completely off. I think it's not
That's
that.
a sort of George Orwell kind of
Almost,
reference, isn't it? Yeah.
almost that kind of attitude. It isn't, it wasn't, and it shouldn't be. But at the same time, the edge is sharper now. And now we've got the additional complication that in the World Cup, India has never lost to Pakistan. So if ever what Mukulika said is slightly possible were to occur, it would be traumatic at a level almost difficult to imagine and swallow. And I wonder what the consequences would be, how the Indians in the crowd are going to react. The audience in that 1999 match was more or less evenly balanced, the expatriates, between Indians and Pakistanis. Today, the assumption, especially with the increasing cost of these tickets, is that overwhelmingly the audience is going to be Indian in Old Trafford tomorrow. And that too is going to raise questions about how they will react and behave as the match goes on. I have my worries.
Overwhelmingly, the audience will be British, I think. But
British Indian.
Yeah.
They will fail the Tibet test
exactly,
with pride.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, I worry about where this hyper-nationalism stops and this new muscular India, which fine, economically and politically is interesting to look at and observe, but not cricket with. I, for one, am surprised where this Bharat army came from. This new...
It was an imitation of the Barmy army.
I know exactly what it is, but it's not. It's more than that, especially given after that... after the Pulwama attack and that 2.5-day skirmish and that downed Indian jet and its pilot and all of that other fun stuff which was happening for a few days right around the time Game Changer was being launched, and which rained on our parade in India because then we were advised all of a sudden to not follow up on the plans we had for our extensive launches and events in India. That was a real shame. But given those camouflage hats worn in support of the Indian military and those men it lost, war and terror should be condemned in all their forms, by the way, for the record. But the gentleman's game with American tank camouflage, courtesy BCCI, that's fine to some extent. It's just display, it's wartime, solidarity, understand what's going on. But then recently, the MS Dhoni's gloves, and fine, he's an honorary lieutenant colonel in the paras, understood that much as well. But that's not the bit. I don't blame Dhoni for doing what he did. Even the Pakistanis a couple of years ago, in a resounding victory at Lord's, did a famous
Take
ritual.
questions, yeah.
Did a famous ritual with their push-ups because they'd just been to military camp with the army. But what's dangerous to me is how the media reacted, how people reacted, how fans reacted, how the Bharat Army reacted, and how for the first time, for the life of me, I've never seen this happen, and I hope it stops. I saw Indian military flags in the stands in a World Cup match here recently. How does that happen? When did this start happening? Muscularity versus this is a different debate. And this is verging on some sort of hate.
One of the ironies, it was actually Pakistani cricket that was expected to bear the burden of nationalism, because cricket was seen very early on by the Pakistani elite, by the establishment, as a way in which the newly independent, newly created nation could assert its existence, its identity, its role in the world. And it coincided with the militarization of Pakistan. When Ayub Khan took over, he promptly, after becoming Chief Martial Law Administrator, Field Marshal, and God knows what else, also appointed himself President of the Pakistan Cricket Board.
Yeah.
And there was very, very self-conscious determination to use cricket to place Pakistan in a certain place in the world stage. Now, what's interesting is that Pakistan has become a little more relaxed about this.
Yes.
Partly because they're losing more often, I guess, who knows. But India... But India, oddly enough, is becoming far more chauvinist in its celebration of its cricketing triumph.
But also, interestingly, Pakistan won test matches in England before India did, right? So this proving a point to India a lot of the time of the new nation, at least on the cricket field, they were playing well, and they were playing, which is why I maintain my 50-50 chance, which is a statistical a prediction, not a technical. Thank you. Okay, we're going to, we normally have 15 minutes, but we have only 10 minutes for questions, so please keep them brief. I'll cluster a couple of questions, 2 or 3, depending on how many. So does anyone have any questions? As you can see, our panelists can talk the legs off this table about cricket. Yeah, there's a gentleman at the back there. We want to maximize time, so please keep it brief. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Just my background, I'm a teacher in Luton, so majority of our Muslims there. I teach about 16-year-old boys. I come from India, South India, and I'm a Muslim. I'm just wondering what the situation will be at the end of the football match, cricket match tomorrow. Waiting to see Pakistani boys in their open-top cars driving through Luton, and what is actually going through their mind after winning a simple cricket match. We have to look at the future, what these kids are actually, we are teaching the kids, what are they taking in, what's their reaction going to be? Just what's your reaction to what I've just said?
Okay, can I take another question? Is there another question? Yeah, there's this lady in the front here, in the white.
A question for Wajahat. In India, we are actually huge fans of Imran. But I think there's also a certain, right now, I think certain loss of hope that he will pull through. That is he fighting an internal battle? And just so you know, we in India, we see him as the best thing that's happened to India, actually. So, do you see some hope that he will stabilize and will democracy take root there? What do you think?
We're talking about cricket. Okay, but Wajahat, do you want to respond?
Sure. So,
There's a hand up there.
Yeah, we'll do it in the next round, quickly.
So quickly about the Luton boys and the famous Pakistani parades, which I too have been observing. No offense to present company or anyone, but there's a term used by Pakistan-based Pakistanis about British-based Pakistanis called BBCD. And of course, that's British-born confused desis. Now it is because of the salad bowl versus melting pot nature of this country's experience with British Asians or British Muslim Asians in particular. I think the experience of Indians versus Bangladeshis versus Pakistanis versus Sri Lankans is very different. I think the Pakistanis have, like all the other expats, have their own little pockets. However, this started around the time Pakistan started winning in England a lot. And it also started around the time Pakistan started playing in England a lot because of the terror attacks in 2009. Essentially, for a little period of time, this was home base. And two things happened in parallel. One, the British, Asian, Muslim, Pakistani, and all sorts of studies, by the way, whether they're at the LSE's South Asian Center or elsewhere, clearly indicate that Pakistanis have not fit well in this culture, at least those who don't do very well. And that's why the death or glory attitude of those boys from Luton and elsewhere, really, for me, and I've talked to a few of them on social media, in person, etc. And the resident Pakistaniyat, they can't speak a word of Urdu, but they're wearing all the gear, and they're going to put the Bharat Army to shame tomorrow if they're let loose and the Pakistanis win. So I think a lot of that has to do with identity. And the other thing which started happening was, there's always politics and logistics go together, right? That's the politics bit. The logistics bit is that this country became, because of that support, that resident support, a bit of a home base, a second home like Dubai for Pakistan cricket. So that's what's really happened, and it's frankly, it's a little fun if not vulgar, and vulgar if not fun. So
thanks.
Let them be. About Imran, yeah, so we kind of like him too, sort of. So he's been polarizer in chief of late. He was expected to be, I remember this great article, the month he announced his candidacy to break the system in '96 in the summer off. And there was a line which said, in the oldest magazine in the country, it said third force or third farce. So questions about Khan, Imran Khan, Imran Kant, have always haunted him. But in his latest role, I feel like there's been stages. Firstly, in that opening speech to India almost a year ago, he was cited widely. You take one step, I will take two. Also, in this 2.5-day mini war recently, he came across, not just to me, but a lot of Indian observers as well, as the better man compared to Modi, who sort of disappeared and was warmongering. He was more sensible in his approach. However, locally, Khan stands compromised. His governance, his cabinet, his personal life, his gaffes, his social media machinery, his dealings with the powers that be and the powers that won't let him be, they are mediocre. He's also inherited a hell of an economic crisis, our worst in decades. He ain't all he's made out to be, but the military clearly likes him, social media likes him, younger people like him, women like him, India likes him. That matters.
Excellent. A round of applause. That's right. Okay. We have 5 minutes. I want to take a few more questions. So there's a gentleman here in the front.
Just about to introduce a bit of gender diversity. Happened to speak to a large number of women cricket players who started cricket in India. Not one of them said that they wanted this as an expression of how big India is or how muscular India is. All of them said they wanted to express themselves, more of self-expression, want to do something for themselves. In fact, I asked one of the players who was the youngest cricket player to go on the cricket ground what she felt like. She said, look, they gave us a good breakfast. I was wondering how good the lunch will be. And to speak about India and Pakistan, happened to go over the 2017 match where women again, where Pakistan played well and everybody thought, including our players, that Pakistan will win. A few of the Indian spectators went and sat with the Pakistanis came and sat with the Indians. The reason, of course, I hope I can say this within the four walls, saying that the Angrezon ne apne ko baanta hai, but we're all one country. Just a thought.
Thank you. Over there at the far end. So we'll take that as a comment, but I think the conclusion is if women dominated sport more, the world would be a better place.
So this is a question for Prashant. So the first All India side to tour England was 1911. I think the next one was 1932.
That's right.
Why did it take so long to return?
Okay, I'll take one last question, this gentleman here, and then we'll have to wrap up. And you have... It's not for nothing that I'm back here. And you have a minute to answer those questions. Yeah.
I just wonder, is there any chance of India having a Muslim captain again?
Okay. Great. Prashant, and you can have the last word. Romesh, did you want to say anything before? Right, okay.
Well, very quickly, after the 1911 tour ended, there were hopes that there would be a tour soon after. But then, of course, you had the First World War, and then the nature of Indian nationalism changes. You have Gandhi, you have mass nationalism, you have anti-colonial protest, which is very directly anti-imperial. By the end of the 1920s, it's increasingly becoming clear that India doesn't want to be part of the British Empire. And of course, on the cricket field, after the collapse of this, or the end of this first, venture to create an all-India team, all sorts of fissiparous tendencies reassert themselves. So caste emerges on the cricket field. The Bombay quadrangular starts pitting Hindus and Muslims. That emerges as a new rivalry. And also, there's a breakdown in the coalition that had made possible the first Indian cricket tour. So there's increasing racism on the cricket pitch, Europeans increasingly becoming very touchy about defeats to Indian teams. So there's a fracturing of all the processes and forces that have made possible that first Indian team, which is why it remains such a singular affair, and why a team like that wasn't put on the cricket field for another 20 years.
Well, there was a test match in India.
Yeah, there was a test match in India.
The British English came and...
Yes, that's right.
And Amarnath scored a century on debut and so on.
1926, yes.
Yeah. So the fact still is that, honestly, it's a fascinating book because Prashant talks about how many English officials in India reacted adversely to the prospect of losing to Indian teams.
Yeah.
And saying they'd give lakhs to stop a match in which that happened. Or that they would actually feel that in an Indian victory, any Indian team's victory against any white team, there would be the seeds of the destruction of empire.
Yeah.
In some ways, equally there was passion on the Indian side. I mean, there's cricket in forging Bengali nationalism, Bengali sub-nationalism, and the Bengali variants of Indian nationalism was actually a very significant factor. And when an Indian team lost to an English team, the same sort of reactions. How could you go and do this kind of thing? You're letting the nation down. It's not just losing a match. So that became an element as well at that time.
Well, I was just thinking about all the things we've been talking about, and particularly some of the dare I say, pessimistic scenarios ahead as well. It struck me that actually what you need is not so much a politician to come into it, except for my good friend here, but for a cricketer actually to rise above some of these things and say things. And I suppose I would say, we were talking about Sangakkara earlier, and I would keep my eye on him, really, or someone like that to actually be able to rise above it all.
I haven't answered his question.
Quickly.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. I think it is possible because their sport is a great leveler. Class, caste, religion are not at all factors in the recognition of merit. That is something, the victory is far more important to anybody associated with the sport than someone's religion. So Azharuddin became captain when he was not the most obvious choice in terms of personality or articulation. Ghulam Ahmed became captain of India 7 years after partition. That's really not to be forgotten. And Pataudi, of course, the youngest captain ever, at the age of 21, as a Muslim as well. So religion wasn't, there were always other considerations. And I think of tomorrow, I mean, one chap who would have been captain except for the time in which he couldn't command a place in the team was Mohammad Kaif, who captained India under 19 and captained India under 23. And played for India very young, but never could become test captain. But the fact that he was Mohammad Kaif was irrelevant to the fact that he was seen as a very wise cricketing head on his able shoulders. So it'll all depend on who comes up, and there are potential contenders right now out there on the field as well.
Our Pakistani friend wants 10 seconds. You have to give it to...
So that question is asked often in the anti-India vitriol, especially on social and mainstream media in Pakistan. But I'll leave you with another question, because he's answered yours. I'll leave you with another one, because I have to represent a flawed state, but I will represent it in all its glory. when, if there will be ever a time, will the time come for an Indian Muslim military chief to take over those three services which were recently touted and seen in action against Pakistan? That's a question which these days comes quite commonly.
No, but I should say it came very close. When the
Quite-
man who would have succeeded
quite
as chief of
commonly.
the army, Lieutenant General Mahmood, was killed in a helicopter crash in the northeast. He was commander of the northeastern command. So in fact, it could have happened, but it so happened that he was killed
When?
less than a decade ago.
Okay, so I think we can surmise that a lot of no, this is a serious point. I think the cricket team and some other institutions in India have done a lot better in certainly the representations of Muslims than the Indian Parliament, where you're about to return next year. It is shocking, the figures on the Indian Parliament, and political representations of Muslims has declined steadily since 1947. And I think that that is so
47,
big.
since
It's
about the
in
90s.
No, but it's a steady decline is what I'm saying. I really hope you will go out and buy these 4 wonderful books. Game Changers and Prashant's book, Cricket Country, are out now. I mean, there's this, Game Changers is already out. Cricket Country will be out next month in the UK, but the Indian edition published by Penguin is already out. The OUP UK edition will be out next month. Do get hold of a copy. And of course, do visit these classics of cricket writing by Shashi Tharoor and Romesh Gunesekera. Thank you very much.